So you should all have copies of the Dictatus Papae, which I put on line, but also Murat kindly distributed an alternative version while he was giving his presentation. In addition, we have these two other documents from the investiture conflict put online by the Fordham Internet History Project. One is a letter from Henry to Pope Gregory, and the other is a response as part of that from Gregory to Henry. Now, as far as I remember, and it kind of vaguely summarizes this a little bit in this paragraph here, there is a little bit of textual doubt about exactly what the Dictatus as it stands is. Now, did anyone get that point, or any of those who've been... Sorry? There is a little bit of what exactly is the Dictatus Papae, what this document that I'm holding here. There is a kind of one view, and then there's a little bit of uncertainty among some scholars.
It's my interpretation, of course, but that's quite a symbol of arrogance.
No. Before we get into the content, before we analyse the actual sentences, I mean, who made it, why, and when? And on the one hand, there's a kind of standard answer, but then there is some doubt. So that means the problem is how we interpret it is up to a point a little bit uncertain. Ravel?
It's not certain.
Sorry?
It's not certain that who wrote it, right?
Yeah, there's that little paragraph there in slightly bad English, which indicates that...
It indicates that most people, or some people, argue that the Pope Gregory VII wrote it, but since it identifies so closely with the later compilation which came later by a cardinal, Cardinal Doistus, that like since the two texts are so closely linked and they seem to agree on so many different aspects, some people think that the Dictatus is actually something written later.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I haven't read an article or something that kind of goes through the stages of the logic of the argument, so I'm not so clear on the details myself. If two things have got lots of words and phrases which are similar, then the chances are that they're somehow connected. It's unlikely that someone has made up purely independently the same things. Which line of connection partly depends on looking at manuscripts and other things like that. Sorry, Elif?
Was that the one, collection in 74 titles? It also mentions the superiority of church over...
Yeah, I think that's the one, yes, I think so. And Fatih, you?
I want to say that we know the conflict between Henry and Gregorius anyway. It really exists, so can't we assume that the Dictatus Papae really was written by the Pope Gregory VII?
No, we can't assume anything, because we do need to, it would be useful to know whether the text we have exactly, or more or less at least, was something which was issued in 1075 during the conflict, or whether it was something which was issued 2 decades later when the conflict has kind of moved on, in which case what's going on is it's written retrospectively in the light of what's happened, rather than as part of as a stage in the argument in that sense. We can work on the assumption, which most kind of people that write the textbooks and so on would like to think, is that it's a product of the actual conflict itself. But we have to bear in mind the possibility that it may not be. So let's approach it in that way. So, Murat?
I'm confused about something. This says it was included in the Pope's register in the year 1075. So can a document created later, might it have been placed?
Well, that's what I don't know. I was wondering about that. Is it something which someone's added later? If it's sitting there and there's clearly no kind of break in the text, and the register was written up chronologically, then it ought to be valid. If, however, you've got 1074 and some 1075 stuff, and then a slightly different handwriting, and you've got this thing, then, yeah. I mean, if we're talking about 100 years or so difference, then people would say, well, that handwriting is from that period, and we'd be certain. This one, we're dealing with a few decades, so it's going to be the same style of handwriting. I don't think the scriptorium at Rome changed that much between 1075 and 1090 or something, but there are possibilities, therefore.
It's not like the registers would be completed for a certain year and then like bound and sort of sealed. It's not like that. So
no. You do get things added in occasionally and so on. I mean, I've worked on bishops' registers from late medieval England, and they sometimes end up getting bound in funny ways, yes, but you occasionally get little slips of paper inserted here and there, and so on. So they're not kind of perfectly chronological in that sense. But let's begin that in some way it either was definitely created at that point during the conflict, or at the or it at least in some way reflects the attitudes of Pope Gregory during the conflict itself. And so we can come to the kind of things that Fatih wanted to say about the content. Now, what does this document say to you from that context and from what we've heard from Irem about the conflict going on?
I was saying something related to arrogance, and I guess that of the Pope alone, all princes shall kiss the feet sentence can prove that. Since the supreme authority of the Pope was tried to be emphasized in the text, and the other examples can be examined, in that for him alone is it lawful and something like that. It symbolizes the sublime authority of him, and one more, I guess. The whole text actually whole text was seeing the others as more lower, the kings, more lower stage, and Pope has the complete authority to give them orders and other stuff.
So yeah, I mean, what the main question here is kind of what is the main purpose of this sequence of sentences? What's the main plan here, which you're kind of addressing? But who haven't we? We haven't heard Jeren today. Well, I'm sorry.
To establish the sovereign authority of the Pope is the main purpose of this.
Yes.
It's really very, very strong verse which says, like in 26th month, that who is not at peace with the Roman Church shall not be considered Catholic. So he's about the kings, and he can pick the king. I mean, he has to approve the king. The one he can just excommunicate anyone he wants, and he seems like superior than anyone.
Yes, yeah, he's definitely on a theoretical and kind of general sense, but also with specifics, where the position of the Pope and his what he can do is being emphasized very strongly here on all levels. Elif?
Well, yes, I think there's a little bit of arrogance in the text, but it occurs to me that when we look but when we look at the context of that time, I think there is a fear within the papacy that, you know, they are separated now. The Holy Roman Church separates into two. Then they have this Orthodox Church, and then lots of other things going on within the district of the Church. I mean, clerics and other doctrines, and they were in a sense threat. And then the emperors, another threat to the authority of the Church. I think this is a declaration that, well, there is only one ultimate Church, and the Pope is the head of it, and Pope has the right to. So it's a kind of protecting the sovereignty and power of the papacy.
Yeah, I mean, depending on your perspective, you can see it as arrogance, or you can see it, as you're suggesting, as as more a reasonable set of statements in defence of problems that had existed until that time, in a way. I mean, that's how the Pope would see it, and the Emperor would see it certainly as an example of arrogance in that sense, or whatever.
And turn out to be lunatic.
Well, give us an example of lunacy in the.
Okay, about the sentence about the synods and sentence about the books that cannot be counted as holy. That if Papa doesn't want that, and Papa can excommunicate whoever he wants and whenever he wants. Although,
canonical would have a very specific meaning, not textbook considered.
Yes, yes. Do you want to expand on that one, Alp?
No, not really.
Right.
I think that's because of this Qatar Bible against.
Well, yeah, or similar things and other things. Yeah. It's. Yeah. This is the accepted version. These are the bits that we accept to be in the Bible. These are the versions of this text which we consider to be right. This is a book which we will allow people to read because it contains the truth or something like that. I mean, on a number of levels there. So it's both a kind of legal thing, but also it's a way of defining what fits in with their particular perspective, in a sense. Yes.
In that sense, that article would actually be the opposite of lunatic. I think it would be quite problematic.
Yeah.
Okay, Oksana wanted to say something. Let's move over here.
I think if we take into consideration the events that were going on at that time, like the conflict between kings and popes and mix between secular and religious, and there was like no definite separation of who can dictate religious duties, it was legitimate to come up with something like that at that time because somebody had to come up with rules to be followed, and somebody had to be in charge of those rules, like the Pope. And plus it kind of creates a hierarchy between, not hierarchy, but complete separation between secular and religious.
It's definitely trying to do that, isn't it? It's definitely dealing with those problems, whether at the level of the Pope primarily, but also bishops get involved here. But it's dealing with that whole spectrum of problems all the way down to local priests that we mentioned there. In a sense, it's setting out the principles that should be followed.
Maybe that kind of language, that kind of strict language, was legitimate at that time.
Well, they're not mincing their words. They're making very, very simple, clear statements. And I think that to make it clear, this is what I mean. That's where, to some extent, Fatty's idea of the arrogance comes out, because they're not sort of expressing it in a nice way. They're not explaining why. They're just saying, this is the rule, this is the rule. So that kind of, I think, partly contributes to that idea. We won't go into the lunacy side of it at this point, but
I just said that about the political side of it, because it's right after, I guess, right after the Great Schism, and the Pope's authority is not yet the unique or sublime, because there are other candidates of papacy. And the authority is fragmented throughout the religious side of the authority. And in that time zone, he wrote that kind of thing. It's just useful on making people terrified of religious things, and making people feel stuck about their religiosity. But politically, it's not correct. It's not a well-established, well-defined logical behavior, just political. Because of that,
right, I see. Okay, yeah, I get what you're saying. Okay, anyone else? Okay, Murat and then Serkan.
Yes, when I read this, I actually foresee the fact that the Roman, the Diocese of Rome, which was actually one of the many dioceses, in other words, bishoprics, now proclaims itself to be at a higher level than all other bishoprics. And in this way is actually, in a way, trying to position itself as the ruling bishopric over all the other bishoprics through appointing other bishops, etc. And it's a claim to a political rule, in a way, over other bishoprics. It's not anymore about just the bishopric, the Diocese of Rome, but actually it is a widespread influence over all other bishoprics.
Yeah, I mean, they'd kind of been striving for that earlier,
Yes.
in terms of their position vis-a-vis the rest of the church, and we discussed that a few weeks ago. But particularly, I think the problem they're concerned with here is what was going on in the Holy Roman Empire, was going on in the German emperor's lands, where he was effectively choosing his bishops and so on. And I think they were it was an attempt to stop that, to say that bishops have to be appointed and vested.
Because it dictates new ways of appointing, etc. And so there's an attempt to reorganize the church, isn't there? That aspect as well?
Well, sort of, yeah. I mean, the organizations kind of stayed the same as far as I can understand, but they just tried to make it work more effectively from the top down. They didn't restructure things in terms of new offices or whatever. It was primarily a case of saying, we've got this structure, but it's not working because the Pope isn't choosing the right bishops, for example, or because priests are behaving badly. So what we're doing is kind of making it work in a sense.
Universalize
yes, yes.
the scheme of things.
Okay, Serkan, you wanted to say? You're good,
No.
right? Oh, I don't know about that. Is he good, everyone? Okay, quickly then, because we've only got a few minutes. So to some extent, as we started off, depending on what this document constitutes, we kind of see it differently. If it is, as many would say, a product of Gregory himself, then Fatih would argue for the arrogance, whatever it might be. We can discuss that. But if it is a later document drawn up later on, after the time of Gregory, in the light of what's gone on, then the same words begin to mean a little bit different. They tell us a bit about what's gone on earlier on, perhaps, and things. The other two documents I put online for you were these two letters from 1076, which show the not so friendly relations that existed between the emperor and the Pope at that time. We won't go through each one in detail and so on, there's no point there, but is there anything particularly interesting or any point that you would like to make in reference to one or both of these? Okay, Serkan?
In the first one would be a letter to Gregory VII, right?
Yes.
So there it says to Hildebrand. Is that the Pope's?
That's his non-papal name. That was his name before, yeah.
It's just like he uses it in a diminutive way.
Yes, I mean, Hildebrand, though Gregory was a very important pope and achieved a lot on a number of levels, good or bad depending on your perspective, as far as I remember, there was some doubt about the legality of his appointment. After all the trouble they've had, and then all the arguments they're having during the conflict, there was some grounds where you could justifiably say, well, he's not really Pope because of this. He wasn't proclaimed in the correct way or something. So, as well as kind of denying him because he wants to, he's also, I think, Henry's picking up on that fact, and so he's using that to say, well, you know, you're not really Pope anyway. So why you know, whatever, and so on. And yeah, using the name there is emphasizing that very, very strongly.
Related to what we were talking about in the last hour, right? I mean, like the name Gregory suggests like also part of the power of the Pope. So by using his normal name or his earlier name, he is reducing. I mean, the king is reducing him to a normal human being.
Yes, well, to a monk, and as a false monk, as it's got here as well. Yes.
To another category.
Yes. So that was whether the king himself did that, or whether his scribes and whatever working with him said, "Oh, we'll get in with that one, sir." Oh, yeah, great, put that one in. But yeah, the intention is very strong there. So from right at the outset, this is obviously a negative letter which is attacking. What does he say here? What's the purpose of this letter? The letter from Henry to Gregory? What's the general drift of this one?
I think just to emphasize that Henry doesn't recognize Gregory as the Pope and as the religious leader.
And therefore, all the things you're claiming you can do as Pope, which may or may not accept, but in this case you're not even justifiably Pope, so you cannot claim to do those things and have that influence over me and so on, yes?
He also specifically addresses the idea that Gregory has the right to, doesn't have the right to proclaim him as emperor. Like he says it twice, that king by the grace of God, he signs it at the end. And he really wants to emphasize the fact that he was directly given the king's emperorship or whatever by God.
Oops, yeah, you'll notice the first dictate as well, that the Roman Church, the Roman Church there kind of means the Pope, of course, because he's going to be head of it, was founded by God alone. So both sides of this conflict are trying to make sure that they get their authority directly from God, and there's no Pope or there's no Emperor that kind of comes in between and has any power over us. So, and of course this goes back to the problems of Charlemagne and later Otto, who were made Emperor by the Pope, and so they're trying to get away from that there as well. Alp?
So am I getting this right? Henry is not only denying Gregory as the legitimate Pope, but he's also denying that if he were to be the
Pope,
his actions.
yeah. Even if you were Pope, but you're not, you couldn't really do this to me anyway, in a sense, yes. Because just in case he loses the legal argument, he still wants to cover himself and say, you can't tell me what to do, yeah. All right?
I have a question in regards to what you said, or what you were talking about a moment ago. As the Roman diocese was going through this struggle to proclaim itself superior for a long time, was there any earlier proclamation in written form than this one? Just, I mean, in regards to the claim of the Roman bishop, the Bishop of Rome, to be superior to others, or was that mainly a political, thing?
I'm not aware of any. I mean, there may well be statements lurking in documents here or there, people thinking about things, but I'm not aware of as a big one that was involved in. Nothing that compares to what we've got in these documents here. No.
But there's collection in 74 titles, which looks like it. I think by Pope Gelasius. I'm not sure.
Yes, that's a little bit earlier, but I don't know the content of that in detail, but it's.
It says papal primacy from Jesus, and
the earlier popes, very early popes that we discussed, were trying to reinforce their position, and they had various arguments. Remember, the Peter is my rock, and therefore the rock that the church is built on, and so on. So there is a tradition for emphasising the position of the Pope. But as far as I know, there's nothing that compares with this in a very conflict situation, because now, for various reasons, the popes are beginning to assert themselves, and they're in a position to do that. Okay, I mean, at the end, within a short amount of time, there is a pope proclaiming a crusade and sending everyone off to another part of the world, and so on. So the situation of the papacy is different from what it had been earlier as well. We've kind of run out of time. We haven't looked at the other one, but these documents are nice because we can read sources that tell us the narrative of the events and so on. But reading these texts as with letters tell us something about the minds of the people involved and where they were coming from and what they thought they were doing. We still have to interpret them, and then we still have to worry about exactly what the texts are, as I said. But letters and statements like this give us a more personal step into the chronological picture in that way. Okay, next week we will kind of continue some of the themes we've been discussing today with reference to the Crusade. So we stay with this mixture of religion and politics. I didn't bring the bibliography along, but it should be on Moodle. There is a text on there where you've got a number of different versions of Pope Urban's proclamation. Various people were there, they wrote things down, or they heard from someone else. What the main purpose I want you to think of is, can we, again, looking at the different versions, can we actually work out what Pope Urban really wanted to to happen? What did he think was going to happen when he proclaimed the First Crusade? Okay, have a nice weekend, everyone. And again, thank you, Irem, and thank you, Murat. Among some scholars.
It's my interpretation, of course, but that's quite a symbol of arrogance.
No. Before we get into the content, before we analyse the actual sentences, I mean, who made it, why and when? And on the one hand, there's a kind of standard answer, but then there is some doubt. So that means the problem is how we interpret it is up to a point a little bit uncertain. Ravel?
It's not certain.
Sorry?
It's not certain that who wrote it, right?
Yeah, there's that little paragraph there in slightly bad English which indicates that...
It indicates that most people, or some people, argue that the Pope Gregory
So you should all have copies of the Dictatus Papae, which I put on line, but also Murat kindly distributed an alternative version while he was giving his presentation. In addition, we have these two other documents from the investiture conflict put online by the Fordham Internet History Project. One is...
wrote it, but since it identifies so closely with the later compilation which came later by a cardinal, Cardinal Doistus, that like since the two texts are so closely linked and they seem to agree on so many different aspects, some people think that the Dictatus is actually something written later.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I haven't read an article or something that kind of goes through the stages of the logic of the argument, so I'm not so clear on the details myself. If two things have got lots of words and phrases which are similar, then the chances are that they're somehow connected. It's unlikely that someone has made up purely independently the same things. Which line of connection partly depends on looking at manuscripts and other things like that. Sorry, Elif?
Was that the one, collection in 74 titles? It also mentions the superiority of church over...
Yeah, I think that's the one, yes, I think so. And Fatih, you?
I want to say that we know the conflict between Henry and Gregorius anyway. It really exists, so can't we assume that the Dictatus Papae really was written by the Pope Gregory VII?
No, we can't assume anything because we do need to, it would be useful to know whether the text we have exactly, or more or less at least, was something which was issued in 1075. A letter from Henry to Pope Gregory, and the other is a response as part of that from Gregory to Henry. Now, as far as I remember, and it kind of vaguely summarizes this a little bit in this paragraph here, there is a little bit of textual doubt about exactly what the Dictatus as it stands is. Now, did anyone get that point, or any of those who've been... Sorry? There is a little bit of what exactly is the Dictatus Papae, what this document that I'm holding here. There is a kind of one view, and then there's a little bit of uncertainty